talking about Jesus here. And verse 6 says, "Now hath he," meaning Jesus, "obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much more he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises." Now the first thing we see in this passage is that the author says that Jesus is a mediator. That's the first big difference between Old Covenant and New Covenant. We have a mediator. A mediator is like a go-between, right? Yeah. Is it? Yeah. You can turn it. Do you know which one this is, Alex? Yeah, just turn it down just a hair. Maybe that'll help. A mediator is go-between. It stands between two parties and mediates or makes up the difference or brings two parties together, let's say. Now in the Old Covenant, there's no Jesus. When you read in the Old Testament, there's no Jesus. There's nobody functioning in that role as a mediator. What you have in the Old Testament is God on one side and the people on the other side. In that case, the people being the Hebrews or the nation of Israel or the Israelites. The Old Covenant is a covenant between God and the nation of Israel, made on Mount Sinai through the Old Testament law. And basically, a covenant works like this. It's a document or a set of promises, like a contract, and one party has obligations to uphold and the other party has obligations to uphold, and as long as both sides uphold their end of the agreement, everything is fine. But in any contract, if one side fails to uphold their part of the agreement, then the contract is broken and something has to take place. If you read the Old Testament carefully, you find out that what takes place is, well, if the people, now you don't have to worry about God upholding his side. He's faithful. He'll uphold his side of the contract. But the Old Testament, being a contract between the nation of Israel and God, if they fail to uphold their part of the agreement, you can read about it in Deuteronomy 28. First of all, it says, if you observe to do all that's written in this book of the law, these blessings will come upon you. And there's about 14 verses of blessings. And we're not going to take time to read it right now. It's interesting to see that. And then if you go on reading, the next thing says, and if you fail to uphold everything, if you fail to observe to do all that's written in this book of the law, and the emphasis there should be on the word all. It's not if you give it your best effort. It's not if you do 90%. It's not if you give it a wholehearted attempt. You've got to do all. He says, if you fail to observe all that's written in this book of the law, these curses will come upon you. Now, we had 14 verses of blessings, and we have something like 40 or 50 verses of curses. Verses of curses. That sounds like a Dr. Seuss book, doesn't it? But it wouldn't be a very pleasant book. But there are way more curses than there are blessings. And it's a kind of a fearful thing to read about. Because, as you know, well, as we're going to find out here, if a covenant breaks down, if a contract fails, and if it's a covenant with God and people, it's not going to fail on God's side, but it will fail on the people's side. And the reason the new covenant is superior, first thing is we have a mediator. Now see, Israel didn't have a mediator. They didn't have a representative. It was between them, the people. Hear, O Israel, is what Moses says when he makes the covenant with them. Between individual people. Now I think this is something to have clearly in our minds. We have a mediator. And that's something that we should keep in mind. His name is Jesus. Jesus is our mediator. He's our go-between. He's our representative. Jesus, I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but Jesus could not have come into the world as a completely divine being. He had to be born as a man, is what I'm saying. He had to come into this world as a man because to uphold for us the new covenant, the human side of it, he had to be a man to do that. The new covenant is superior because it's not a covenant between human beings, us in other words, and God like the old covenant. It's a covenant between Jesus and God. Jesus upholding the human side of it. Now here, let's just read a little bit more. He's a mediator of a better covenant, and I'll say more about that. Look at verse 7. For if that first covenant had been faultless, meaning the Old Testament, if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. Now, let me just put that in everyday language. If there's no problem with the old covenant, we wouldn't be here talking about a new covenant. Right? That's just making logical sense there. If there's no difficulty, if there's no problem, if there's nothing amiss with the old covenant, there's no reason for a new covenant. What's the problem? Well, let's read the next verse. verse 8. For finding fault with them, meaning the nation of Israel, the human side of the covenant, for finding fault with them, he saith, and now it's a quotation. This is God talking through the prophet Jeremiah. The next word says, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord. This is God talking through the prophet Jeremiah. When I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. Now he says, I'm going to make a new covenant. Well, first of all, we find out what the problem was. The problem was on the human side of things. When God made a covenant in the Old Testament with the nation of Israel, it broke down not because God failed, but because the human side of it failed. Now, I think a lot of Christians still have that kind of thought in their minds, that I'm a Christian because I've promised to do better. I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. I'm trying to change my life. And all those things are admirable. I'm not saying those are bad things. But you see, the new covenant is not an agreement between you and God. He didn't come to you personally and make an agreement with you. Jesus, at the Last Supper, took the cup and he said, this cup is my blood of the new covenant. Isn't that what he said? We quote it sometimes when we do communion. Jesus took the cup and he said, this cup is my blood. He didn't say it's your blood. He said it's my blood. Aren't you glad he didn't ask you to go to the cross and shed your blood or some other place? Jesus said, this cup is my blood of the new covenant, shed for many, for the remission of sins. That is to say, the discharge from penalty from sins. Jesus made the covenant with God. Jesus, as a man, made the human side of the covenant. Now, the reason the new covenant is far superior to the old covenant is this. In the old covenant, if they didn't uphold their part of it, then the covenant was broken and they were out of God's favor. In the new covenant, he doesn't even make the covenant with you. He makes it with Jesus. So it's certain and secure because Jesus has a perfect life. He has a perfect record. The covenant can never fail because it's between him and God. You enter into it because you put your faith in Jesus as the mediator, as your representative. And so you have entered into a covenant or an arrangement with God that's eternal and secure and can never fail because it doesn't go down the drain when you make a mistake. Because God didn't ever make you make promises in the first place. I think sometimes we put too much faith in ourselves. I remember driving through another town, although they have these same things here. Churches like to put these signs out front, put little slogans or sayings or, comments, on the sign. You've seen those. And I often thought that'd be kind of fun. I'd like to get one of those signs. No, I don't want the kind where you have to go out there and put the letters on. That's too much work. I want an electronic one. I can put pithy sayings on. But anyway, I was driving through this other town, Woodward, as a matter of fact. I just want to say that so that you don't think I'm pointing fingers at some local church and wonder who did this. But anyway, I was driving through town, over at Woodward actually, and this church had a sign out, and as I drove by, I looked, and the sign said, "God is faithful, are you?" Kind of like you expect to see some, like a wagging finger. That's kind of the tone of it. God is faithful, are you? Well, if I'm going to be completely, perfectly honest, maybe not always. I mean, if that's the way it is, if that's the basis of my relationship with God, then I've got a problem. Because I might fail. I'm prone to failure. And I'm not going to take a survey, but I know because you're human, you are too. So does my relationship with God go down the drain because I fail? No. Because it was never based on me and my performance in the first place. It was based on Jesus. He's the mediator of the new covenant. Now, you notice in verse 9, he says, not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt. He's talking about the law, the Old Testament law. And he says, this new covenant is not according to that one. Or another way to say it is, it's not like that one. It's not like it. Now again, I think a lot of Christians think it is. I understand what the thinking is. I understand that there's a desire we have this big book, Bible. It says Old Testament, New Testament. There's a desire to sort of smooth it all together and make one thing out of it. But it's not one thing. He says the new covenant is not like the old covenant. It's not the same. I think a lot of Christians think it is. It's just the same old thing with some new faces, with Jesus thrown in the mix. And I might have mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again. when I was in high school, I shouldn't tell you this because this will help you know how old I am. If you can there's this movie that came out called Rocky with Sylvester Stallone. Everybody remember that? Everybody seen that movie? And I went to show and saw. We took April to see it. We were dating at that time, and we went to see Rocky, and it was good. You know, if you've ever seen it, it's a pretty good movie, and it made a lot of money. And so a few years later, they made another one, Rocky 2. I think there's, how many are there? Do you know, Alex, how many there are? 4? 4 or 5 Rockies. Well, anyway, I'm not going to talk about the others, but Rocky 2 came out. And I thought, I liked Rocky 1, so I'm going to go see Rocky 2. So I went to Rocky 2. And you know what? It was just the same story with some different faces. Same thing, basically. He fights the guy. The same story, basically, with some different faces. And I think that's like a sequel. I think that's what a lot of Christians think the New Covenant is. Just the same thing with new faces. But it's not the same thing. You notice verse 9 says, not according. Not according. In other words, not based on. Not connected to. Not limited to. Not like. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers, in other words. This new covenant, he says, is not like it. Well, we've seen the first thing that's not like it is we have a mediator, a representative, Jesus. Look at the next thing. Oh, they continued not in my covenant, he says, meaning the nation of Israel. And so I regarded them not, saith the Lord. Now that's just a little short summary of what it says in Deuteronomy 28 in a very long-winded and detailed way. If you observe to do all of these things, these blessings come on you. If you do not observe to do all that's written in this book of the law, these curses come upon you. That's the old covenant. He says the new one's not like that. It's not based on you, it's based on your mediator. Now I can remember when I first became a Christian, way back in about 1980 or so, I can't tell you how many messages I heard as a Christian sitting in church. Not in a Jewish synagogue 2,000 years ago, but in a church under the new covenant, living today with a mediator, Jesus. I can't tell you how many times I heard messages from Deuteronomy 28. Basically just with no modification. Just you be diligent to observe to do, and you'll be blessed. And if you don't be diligent, then that's why all these bad things are happening in your life. Did you know what's wrong with a message like that is it leaves out something very important. Hello, where's Jesus in that picture? There's no Jesus. There's no room for Jesus. The reason there's no Jesus is there's no room for him because it's all based on you. Those kind of messages are not for Christians. See, your life and your relationship with God is not based on your diligence because the emphasis on that is on the word all. It's not based on how diligent you are. It's based on being perfect. What he's basically saying is you can't make any mistakes if you want to be blessed. And if you make even one, you're under the curse. You know, it's not that I'm so smart, and maybe you might think, well, you're being a little bit extreme about that. Alex, if you'd hold your finger there, no, you don't hold your finger, but you mentally hold your finger here. I'm coming right back. And I want to look in Galatians chapter 3 for just a second. Alex, if you would turn to this. I'm trying to get over this thing of saying hold your finger there. Because one time when Rod Goodman was here, he said, I kept saying, hold your finger and turn here. He said, I've run out of fingers. And anyway, look at Galatians chapter 3, verse 10. Look at what it says here. Now, not that I'm so smart. I read this right here. This is what Paul says. And this is a commentary on Deuteronomy 28.